your best strategic position in life in general, many have argued very strongly, psychiatrists, philosophers, you name it, is how can I rectify the mistakes in which I made relative to the situation or circumstances I was just in, even if it wasn't my fault or your fault? Why do we say that? Well, first off, this is an overall encompassing, I guess you could say, philosophy that applies not only to science, but to life in and of itself, which is that, again, you and I can only control the immediate vicinity and environment around us, and even then, sometimes we don't have control. So rather than spiraling into a downwards negative mentality of how we can keep that control and remain that with that sort of stronghold position of it within the given moment, it is best to reflect afterwards on the incidences that occurred, even if you did nothing wrong. And again, you might be saying, Dave, what situation, what scenario are you referring to here? I'm literally referring to everything that you and I do in our day-to-day lives. The best strategy is, how can I rectify the mistakes I've made so this doesn't happen again, so I am not put in a similar position again, okay? Now, welcome back, folks, to another episode of Let's Get Banned. Today's episode is called Acoustic Levitation. Its ties to land patents, gang-stalking, and Apollo 11 was only a 3-minute mission. So with that being said, the reason why I gave the sort of example that I did just now, or sort of the, I guess you could say, quote unquote, life advice, if you will, not that I'm a master counselor, believe me, I have my own issues, is that we're going to see here that that same method or apparatus could actually be applied to resolving some of the discrepancies of gang stalking and mental, I guess you could say, intervention that we do not want to occur. So let's jump right into it. wanttoknow.info. Now, this is the very bottom of the page. If we scroll up very quickly, this here is a document, okay, a manifesto, if you will. It is called From PSYOP to Mind War, The Psychology of Victory by Colonel Paul Valley, Commander, with Major Michael Aquino, PSYOP Research and Analysis Team Leader. Now, here's what's interesting. This document allegedly leaked many, many years ago, and again, they made it public, and honestly, I could see why they did, because no one at the time would have believed it. There's people now that still don't believe in what's being said here. Not saying that we should believe everything written on paper just because it comes from, a major, a colonel, someone within the respected hierarchy of that of a given nation's military, but mainly because, again, the data evidence and the data points that we've been evaluating and analyzing on the show, especially in the members-only episodes on Patreon, really bring this full circle. Now, I'm not going to get into who Major Michael A. Aquino was or is. If you want to look him up for yourself, by all means you can. Very controversial figure, known to do some very depraved things, if you will, not just in his personal life, but within that of the war and within war in and of itself, in the military and things like that. Now, here's what's interesting. And I quote, "My own image as an occult personality added fuel to the wildfire. Mind war was now touted by the lunatic fringe as conclusive proof that the Pentagon was awash in black magic and devil worship," end quote. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because if we scroll down at some of the documents over here, some of the paragraphs, we see here the advantage of mind war. Now, again, they refer to mind wars in a very general or vague way, but I want you folks to know, again, it has to do with remote viewing. It has to do with certain frequential electromagnetic interventions, if you will, and we will jump into all of that very shortly. But if we jump over here, it says, ordinary warfare, on the other hand, is characterized by its lack of reason. The antagonists just maim or kill each other's people and steal or destroy each other's land until one side is hurt so badly that it gives up, or both sides are hurt so badly that they agreed to stop short of victory. After such a war, there is lasting misery, hate, and suffering. The only loser in mind war are the war profiteers, companies and corporations which grow fat on orders for helicopters, tanks, guns, munitions, etc. Consequently, what President Eisenhower referred to as the military-industrial complex can be counted upon to resist implementation of mind war as the governing strategic conflict doctrine. Now, if we take a look here at the top, mind war is that it conducts wars in non-lethal, non-injurious, and non-destructive ways. Essentially, you overwhelm your enemy with argument. You seize control of all the means by which his government and populace process information to make up their minds, and you adjust it so that those minds are made up as you desire. Everyone is happy, no one gets hurt or killed, and nothing is destroyed. With that being said, here's what's interesting as well. We can argue very strongly before I go on that, again, you could say, Dave, this is the info war, the information warfare, propaganda, Operation Mockingbird, mind control, you name it. What's so significant about this? But take a look at this. Not only is there a reference to the traditional apparatus and various strategies of propagandization and the dissemination of it, but we'll see here, John Alexander's military review article in support of Psychotronics, intelligence and operational employment of ESP, was decidedly provocative. Criticism of research in this area, based as it is on existing frontiers of scientific law, brings to mind the laughter that greeted the Italian scientist Spallanzini in 1794 when he suggested that bats navigate in the dark means of what we now call sonar. Quote, if they see with their ears, then do they hear with their eyes? End quote, went the joke, but I suspect that the U.S. Navy is glad someone took the idea seriously enough to pursue it. Now, here's what's equally as interesting as well. If we take a look at ESP right here, we will notice that if we jump to this website over here, this is joffried.com, what we're going to notice here is that this is Ben Rich. These are some quotes from interviews that were given with Ben Rich, who was the former head of Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, and we'll jump back to this article very shortly. However, I want to quote this specific article right here, this paragraph, sorry. When Rich was asked how UFO propulsion worked, he said, "Let me ask you, how does ESP work?" You see that right there? ESP is brought up already. We're jumping right into it, folks. In the mind control document having to do with psychotronics, remote viewing, and traditional dissemination of disinformation and propaganda to win wars without the need of violence. But take a look at this. When Rich was asked how UFO propulsion worked, he said, "Let me ask you, how does ESP work?" The questioner responded with, "All points in time and space are connected." Rich then said that's how it works, end quote. Now, again, this also substantiates how we could say psychological warfare from a remote viewing perspective works, how UFO craft are able to pull time and space to them, irrespective of everybody else around them. Okay? Now, here's what we're going to notice. And I quote, "Psychotronic research is in its infancy, but the U.S. Army already possesses an operational weapon system designed to do what Lieutenant Colonel Alexander would like ESP to do, except that this weapon system uses existing communications media. It seeks to map the minds of neutral and enemy individuals and then to change them in accordance with U.S. national interests. It does this on a wide scale, embracing military units, regions, nations, and blocks. In its present form, it is called Psychological Operations, or PSYOP," end quote. Now, here's what's interesting as well, too. For those that say, Dave, what's technically wrong with, because we got to play both sides. We got to be consistent and fair here. What's wrong with the U.S. national interest being pushed amongst those that are not so certain? I don't have any issue if you're actually pushing democratic agendas, but we all know, especially those on the Patreon members episodes, because of the intrinsic connections that we make that are not just, vague statements. They're actual numbers, connections, details. It's being run by, the world's being run by psychopaths. And unfortunately, as we know, America is the lead control or powerhouse of that. I'd love for America to truly be democratic as presented on the surface level, but we know that it isn't ultimately. Right now, here's what's interesting as well, too. If we jump to the very bottom of this document, okay, they touch on psychotronics, but they don't really get into the, I guess you could say, the details of it. But here's what I found most peculiar. This is also consistent, total fluke. This is consistent, folks, with a lot of the ionized air pockets that a lot of independent ufologists and researchers have conducted studies on within alleged areas within Nevada, within New Mexico, you name it, where there are supposed alien bases, whether it's, repair bases or bases for these aliens to literally rest in some cases, or, living quarters. Some of them are sort of just repair and sort of refuel centers, if you will. You remember when I said, folks, multiple times that the ionized air pockets seem to be very focused and diluted and congregated in a very almost, I don't want to say anomalistic sense, but so curated that it can't be anomalistic. It can't be natural. They are ionizing air pockets for multiple reasons. Now take a look at this. Ionization of the air. An abundance of negative condensation nuclei or air ions in ingested air enhances alertness and exhilaration, while an excess of positive ions enhances drowsiness and depression. Before I go on, again, this is a little bit part of my English, a little bit of a mind fuck, because we can argue very strongly that depending where you live in the world, depending on what, off the books operations are going on, not trying to say that it is not within you or I, but some of the depression that you and I deal with could be due to this. We don't know, right? Now, here's the thing. Calculation of the ionic balance of a target's audience atmospheric environment will be correspondingly useful. Again, this is a naturally occurring condition. Caused by such varying agents as solar ultraviolet light, lightning, and rapidly moving water, rather than one which most be artificially created. Okay, a detonation of nuclear weapons, however, will alter atmospheric ionization levels, end quote. There's a lot to unpack there, but the main points I want to point out are this right over here. Caused by such varying agents as solar ultraviolet light, lightning, and rapidly moving water. This is interesting. Why do I say that? Because for those on the Patreon, you'll know, and again, I don't mean to promote it so much in this episode, but you'll know that there is footage we have analyzed during Zoom calls and many other conversations and group interactions within the community. That there are craft seen coming and going for a split second caught on camera in and out of water waves. And I think we covered one of that piece, some of that footage on a live stream 2 or 3 weeks ago, sent to me by a friend of mine. You can see the craft for a split second leaving the water, but it was interesting. It was during a very particular tidal wave of the water. Now, interestingly enough, too, we take a look at solar ultraviolet light and lightning. Isn't it true that we see in many cases, particularly the triangle-based crafts, seemingly harnessing energy off of lightning strikes? It can't be a fluke. Certainly can't be. Right now, again, it could be a fluke that the sightings occur, but there's so many nowadays, and we see these craft feeding off of lightning strikes so often that, again, whether human or military, there is something with respects to the ionization of the air and these certain air pockets. Now, the final thing is ultraviolet light. We're going to tie this back, by the way, to the acoustic levitation and many other things. Again, it was said many years ago, it was thought by the public, at least the public academia of science, that gravity was a particle. It wasn't. Gravity turns out to be a wave, very similar again to ultraviolet light, to rapidly moving water. You see how things tend to move in waves in many respects. Now, let's take a look at this right here. Extremely low frequency waves, ELF waves, up to 100 hertz are once more naturally occurring, but they can also be produced artificially, such as for the Navy's Project Sanguine for submarine communication. ELF waves are not normally noticed by the unaided senses, yet their resonant effect upon the human body has been connected to both physiological disorders and emotional distortion. Infrasound vibration up to 20 hertz can subliminally influence brain activity to align itself to delta, theta, alpha, or beta wave patterns. Before I go on, we can argue very strongly it's not that difficult for Russian generals who have said that they had to fine-tune the energy contour of the human brain without using technology or chemicals or any type of medicine or drugs. Certainly makes sense. Continuing on, inclining an audience toward everything from alertness to passivity. Okay, before I go on, first thing I could think of, 9/11. You're telling me that some type of apparatus wasn't used to create even more panic during 9/11 to help redirect mass consciousness, presuming this is factual based on the documents written here for the U.S. Army. My God, redirecting mass consciousness may even be easier than I had presumed. Again, we need to stay clear of the, I guess you could say, the focus in which is present of what the elites are trying to disseminate into the world. Now, infrasound could be used tactically as ELF waves endure for great distances, and it could be used in conjunction with media broadcasts as well. Again, after General of the Army Douglas MacArthur's famous aphorism, "In war, there is no substitute for victory," end quote. General Douglas MacArthur was also the same guy who said that he fears insidious forces working from within the United States rather than the ones from without. So, again, we can play both sides of that. I just remembered that off the top of my head, but okay. Let's take a look here at forbiddenknowledge.tv.net. Take a look at this. This is analyzing the paper of mind control and all that. Take a look at this right here. One can only imagine how far this technology has progressed in the past 30 years. I have long suspected that the apathy of the general population of the U.S. towards the obvious falsity of the government's official story about 9/11 must be due to mass mind control spewing from the controlled echo chamber of the so-called news media, cell phone towers, ELF waves, HARP, and the like. There are literally thousands of patents for such mind control weapons. Years ago, I received a stack the size of a New York City telephone book of copies of such patents. Now, here's what's interesting. In 1980, an obscure internal U.S. Army concept paper, again, from PSYOP to Mind War, accidentally became public. Though only a brief theoretical speculation, it exploded into the focus of alarmist rumors and debates for the next 3 decades. Is the government involved in invasion of the mind beyond the blundering, haphazard legacy of the infamous MKUltra experiments? Even more unsettling, Do such efforts extend beyond conventional scientific research to dark and arcane arts, whose very existence is the stuff of legend? Again, we're going to notice. End quote. So, if we carry on here, let's first define, electronic harassment, mental coherency, and all that. So, and I quote, In the first half, private investigator, this is from Dr. Joe Dispenza. Again, think of him what you will, but again, regardless of the controversy surrounding an individual projecting this information, we must also evaluate all aspects of it regardless, right? In the first half, private investigator specializing in electronic countermeasures, Roger Tolches, discussed the recent electronic harassment attacks on U.S. Embassy employees in Cuba. Again, Havana Syndrome, all right? As well as the state of current electronic harassment weapons, end quote. Now, very quickly, it was just reported in the news today that, at least according to the State Department and the Pentagon, these cases of Havana Syndrome were caused by crickets. I'm not sure if crickets emit a certain frequency. I'm not, laughing to rule it out, but at the same time, Camden made a good point when we were doing the Kraken. We covered that story today. Nano crickets? Like, was there some alteration to them? So anyways, I mean, the NanoQuell document from the Patreon will prove that too, right? Or at least substantiate it to a large extent. 21 individuals at the embassy complained of widely suffering symptoms that included things like nausea, hearing loss, feeling vibrations, hearing audible sounds in certain part of the rooms. Rather than ultrasonic attacks on the employees, he suspects biocoded directed energy was used on them, which would explain why their symptoms varied so much. This type of attack, he revealed, involves taking samples of a person's DNA and then integrating them into a unique algorithm, which can be transmitted from cell towers or satellites directly to the targeted person, end quote. Very recently, okay, I don't know if it was 2021 or 2020, but please forgive me, but I do know for a fact very recently, U.S. diplomats and the State Department complained that United States diplomats within China were forced to give anal swabs. Okay, I know it sounds funny, but bend over and give anal swabs by the CCP before leaving China. I said this from the very beginning, and those of you that have stuck around and have been with the show for this long, thank you so much, will know that I've said this, which is that you get someone's anal swab, you find out everything about them. Sure, I do believe it was an intention by the CCP to embarrass the diplomats, but not only that, you get their anal swab, you find out what type of medication they're on, you find out what type of health issues they have, you could find out patterns, things like that. Not only that, but it would be a perfect scenario for something like this, biocoded attacks. Again, could be used, and in this case here, could be used against North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, if samples of his DNA could be obtained, okay? Tolches suggested that a satellite attack was used against attendees at ConspiracyCon in Northern California in 2009, and he also talked about problems with fiat currency in America. All right, now here we go with mental coherency. In the latter half, researcher and author Dr. Joe Dispenza spoke about how to encourage a greater version of one's creative abilities as well as access and tune into frequencies beyond the material world in order to increase mental coherency. When people go into a meditative state where they are not focused on their body, their environment, or even time itself, they enter into an inner world of pure consciousness, moving from the realm of matter to that of energy, he outlined. End quote. Now, the example I can give is, when you have a really good feeling or you feel like you're being communicated to telepathically or you get butterflies in your stomach and you just feel so good. Whether it's a rush of serotonin or not, it doesn't matter. But the point is that, when you feel like time has stopped all around you, that good of a feeling. I know many of us may have not had that lately, but you see what I'm saying? That's what he's referring to here. That's like a teaser trailer of a movie that we have not been allowed to watch because the government has covered that movie up from us, metaphorically, right? Take a look. It is in this kind of altered state that various types of healings are possible, he added, citing several case studies in which people had sudden recoveries from ailments. Okay? Acting and feeling the same way over years creates a kind of hardwiring in our brains. This accounts for the finite patterns that become our identity, he stated. Yet he continued, through meditative and breathing techniques, we can become conscious of this and begin to change by mentally rehearsing new ways of being. In addition, he reported that practicing the feeling of gratitude has been shown to help people's thinking become more coherent and serve as an agent of positive emotional change, end quote. Now, we can also argue very strongly, especially in the latter half of this paragraph, that the elites are harnessing this too. Just because they do very depraved things doesn't mean that they're not grateful for certain things as it pertains to them. Right? So that sort of mental aspect and energetic and esoteric aspect could be curated or formulated, not broken, but bent, and not always in the right way, or in the way of a, you could say moral derogative or prerogative, if you will. But according to popularmechanics.com, we've analyzed this many times, especially for those that have been with the show for quite an extensive period of time. Government accidentally reveals documents or releases documents on psychoelectric weapons. Again, end quote. This was done accidentally by a Freedom of Information Act or FOIA request. They know what's going on, folks. I'm just bringing this diagram up here to show the different ways in which frequencies could affect different parts of the human body and how it could be done so easily. Now, the rebuttal I have to this with respects to, oh my gosh, can't they be doing this to us right now? Yes, but if they do it to everybody, folks, there's not going to be a population for the elites to control. Let's remember that. It's a double-sided coin here, okay? Now, here's what's interesting as well, too, and I quote, going back to Mr. Michael Aquino, yet another ex-follower had to procure a restraining order, according to empireexposed.blogspot.com, not exactly mainstream media website, had to procure a restraining order against Aquino for allegedly harassing her, calling early every morning for 2 months straight, pressuring her to return to his satanic fold, even showing up at her home, banging on her door at 3 a.m, yelling she'd better watch out for his next moves. Now, interestingly enough, it's been said that Mr. Aquino is involved in certain, satanic apparatuses and things like this. However, again, let's not judge. Let's play it down the middle. We got to be consistent and fair if we're going to evaluate all the angles. Through Aquino's 38 years in uniform holding above top secret clearance throughout, the Army officer attended or worked at the following schools at the Department of Defense capacities: Industrial College of the Armed Forces, National Defense University, Defensive Intelligence College, Defense Intelligence College, DIA, U.S. Army Defense College. I mean, it goes on, a State Department. This is, you want to talk about deep state, folks, this is the key of it right here. The Airspace, Space and Missile Defense Association. Again, he was also a Green Beret officer. Okay, he also authored dozens of scholarly DoD papers, and most notably Mind War, and books sold on Amazon. A regular commercial renaissance man of postmodern warfare, end quote. The reason I bring this up is because this is the type of individual, along with people like, for example, Mike Pompeo, Dick Cheney, that are right in there with respects to the controlling elements of the deep state relative to the military-industrial complex and the military media complex. Because again, a lot of people say, Dave, deep state, who would you name? Folks, trying to give you as many names as I could right here and now. Dick Cheney, right? We look, at a lot of people like, not necessarily Jeffrey Epstein, but people above him, if you will, which we'll be covering in a later episode and things like that. But again, Mr. Aquino, these would be Mike Pompeo, the deep state guys, the CIA guys, the ones that have sort of moved all over the place, right? They know the written rules, but they also know the unwritten ones with a bit of a wink, wink and a nudge, nudge, right? So again, let's take a look at this. Projects Bluebird, Artichoke, and MKUltra, and I quote, were the early, highly illegal secret forerunners from which Aquino and his contemporaries inherited and massaged with their own advanced innovations, quote, innovations, through MKUltra and Project Monarch, okay? The intelligence community was bent on honing its clandestine skills collecting research on drug experimentation, working early with Big Pharma to test LSD and a number of other truth-enhancing mind-control drugs, end quote. You folks know this. I'm sure you do. You don't come to the channel to learn about the basic fundamentals of what MKUltra entailed. However, I bring this up because you see drug experimentation? It makes me think that because the CIA has direct curation and control with the major cartels, is there something being inserted into these drugs that, again, as a sort of tit-for-tat negotiation, CIA, because they need the drug money to fund the secret space black project programs, the CIA sits down with these guys off the record, of course, and these drug cartel leaders and says, listen, don't ask questions, you put this formula inside of your drug, okay, when you manufacture it in Colombia, Mexico, you name it, okay, Afghanistan, whatever, the poppy fields and all that. You add this in there. No one's going to notice, and we're going to lay off, and we're going to make, an arrest, a major, seizure at the border every 4 or 5 months to look good for the newspaper and stuff like that. But we all know what's really going on here. Everybody's happy. And on top of that, maybe we'll take a little bit less of a cut next time we have to take our piece from the dirty money, right, to fund the black projects. This is how it goes. I'm not saying this is what happened, but this is how it usually goes. Now, let's take a look at this right over here. Gang-Stalking mindcontrolcults.com. Electronic weapons and electronic mind control. Okay, let's take a look here. The individual may think that the most important reality is his own existence, but this is only his personal point of view. This lacks historical perspective. This is from Dr. Eric Karlstrom, Emeritus Professor of Geography, CSUS, in November 2013. Again, it's not like this stuff is all coming out now so we could say, oh, is the CIA trying to distract us? This has been there. This has been there. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electronically control the brain. Someday, armies and generals will be controlled by electric stimulation of the brain. These weapons are more dangerous than atomic destruction. With knowledge of the brain, we may transform, We may shape, direct, roboticize man. I think the great danger of the future is that we will have roboticized human beings who are not aware that they have been roboticized. End quote. Again, human alien hybrids, things like this. Now, this also sort of indirectly answers the question when people say, Dave, how come if aliens wanted to attack us in a physical sense, from an imperialistic, traditional, kinetic sense, shooting lasers and things like this, projectiles, whatever you name it. Why haven't they done it? Again, folks, it's the perception. It's possible they're doing this via that of time travel and manipulating space-time anomalistic certain frequencies that allow to open portals and other things. But putting that aside, look at the mental aspect. There's more to be won from a mental aspect in a patience of a long game than anything else. Someone told me a long time ago, Dave, you can defeat 2 or 3, maybe 4 men with muscle, but you can defeat 1,000 if you have this right. Your brain, right? Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, take a look at this right here. This so-called, quote, cerebral inhibition meeting, this was a Macy conference that occurred from 1946 and 1943, was mind control and cybernetics. Okay, then the Macy conferences grew out of a March 1942 meeting on the topic of cerebral inhibition. Wikipedia states, again, it's right in front of us in a lot of aspects, this so-called cerebral inhibition meeting was sponsored by the Josiah Macy Foundation and attended by scientists like Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead and 5 others. Together, they would initiate the cybernetics group. Among its members, this group was called the Man-Machine Projects. Okay, it was one of the first organized studies of interdisciplinarity, spawning breakthroughs in systems theory and leading to the foundation of what was later to be known as cybernetics. Here's what's interesting. In 2002, the WTA, the World Transhumanist Association, modified and adopted the Transhumanist Declaration. The Transhumanist FAQ gave this formal definition for transhumanism. Now, before I read the formal definition of transhumanism, keep in mind this is going to be sugar-coated, but not only that, 2002, notice something. This was under the Bush administration. Didn't the Bush and Cheney administration ban any type of at least public academic research into this? And not only this, but stem cell research. I guess you could say cloning, things like that, because it was considered unethical, unmoral, and goes against too many people's religious beliefs, would create too many problems. That was the surface level excuse. Okay, folks, we take a look here, and I quote, obviously they prevented it because they knew what could be done with it, and they knew if science studied it on a public level, relative to the public academia of Oxford, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, you name it, people were going to figure things out, because even the public level of scientists are not that stupid, which is why in some cases, some of them have been brought in. Again, Jacques Vallée, we could argue very strongly, being one of them. So, the intellectual and cultural movement that affirms the possibility and desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition through applied reason, especially by developing and making widely available technologies to eliminate aging and to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capabilities. Okay? Now take a look, and I quote, "We are now in a position to speculate on some of the end goals of these kinds of research. It would seem that the combined tools of cybernetics and philosophy of transhumanism may soon provide the controllers with the scientific powers to greatly increase their own lifespans, perhaps thereby achieving some type of, or some sort of physical immortality, if you will." Okay? Now take a look at this. It is therefore a Freedom of Information request produced, a 1970 NASA report on implantable biotelemetry systems, which describes the development of this kind of device. By the way, before I go on, this is verified. Personally, I've checked this out. It is therefore possible, take a look at this, that biological application of radar could be used as a weapon on an individual basis for sociological or political purposes. End quote. That's a very goddamn fancy way of saying that a living being, if tuned correctly with the brain, just like how the Russian general said, contacting alien civilizations could mess with radar and, militaristic capabilities and weapons. Now, take a look at this. In total population control in 2000, Nicholas Jones states, Earth is wrapped in a donut-shaped magnetic field. Circular lines of magnetic flux continuously descend into the North Pole and emerge from the South Pole. Again, Walter Russell's Universal One described this about all planets relative to that of being a form of consciousness, if you will. Now, interestingly enough, too, the ionosphere, an electromagnetic wave conductor 100 kilometers or 62 miles above the Earth, consists of a layer of electrically charged particles acting as a shield from solar winds. End quote. Ionizing air pockets, not just for their bases, but for many different things, for the vile vortices, having to, things like the Bermuda Triangle, being able to go in and out of certain planets. Now, let's take a look here. As noted previously, the discoveries of Nikola Tesla bear directly on mind control as many other topics, including ENMOD, or environmental modification. Before I go on, environmental modification. You folks see all the random natural disasters that are not supposed to be occurring that are due to climate change. Again, not trying to make any implications. I'm sure there's two sides of that coin there, but it's there. We have it. Here, I include more, and this also has to do, with Dan Winters saying that remote viewing and you could say electromagnetic cones, if you will, not only are the same apparatuses and methodology that Walter Russell discussed and that extraterrestrials use to propel their craft, but we can also use remote viewing to create, literally to manifest hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. Again, special shout out to Riel. Thank you so much, brother. Here I include more about of his still poorly understood innovations. Those within the intellectual fortitude to read this section will be amply rewarded with a rudimentary understanding of how and why mind control technologies relate to technologies of weather manipulation and earthquake production, among others. It seems Tesla was about 100 years ahead of everyone else in the field of electromagnetism. Okay, now, again, this is, if we go on here, we're going to see there's the Earth resonant frequency or the Schumann resonance. Quick shout out to the Schumann Beings Telegram group. Thank you so much, brother. Great to see you guys. Again, being so active in the group there. With that being said, take a look at this, climateviewer.com. All right, and we're going to get to the acoustic levitation very shortly. We are the ELF generation. Since birth, we have been inundated by external electrical sources. Again, interestingly enough, if you were to go to, even if you live in a city, go to the forest or the local, park, if you will, and do what many refer to as grounding, where you put your bare feet on the ground, you're automatically going to feel a much more intuitive connection with nature. Again, not saying that ELF's external electrical sources are not affecting our minds and our brain waves in a certain state there, but far less so than that of, I guess you could say, a dense populated city, whether you're on the job site working, whether you're in the truck driving, whether you're in the office cubicle, if you will, right? Now, let's take a look here. ELF waves up to 100 hertz are once more naturally occurring, but they can also be artificially produced, such as for the Navy's Project Sanguine for submarine communication. Interestingly enough, before I go on, dolphins being able to communicate telepathically as well. No, we don't know what they do. We haven't figured it out. Yeah, okay. ELF waves are not normally noticed by the unaided senses, yet their resonant effect upon the human body has been connected to both physiological disorders and emotional distortion. Infrasound vibration up to 20 hertz can subliminally influence brain activity to align itself to delta, theta, alpha, or beta wave patterns. All right, now here's what's interesting. Again, take a look at these applications in the frequency range relative to how the Russian, this chart right here, relative to how the Russian parliament acknowledges the quote conspiracy theorist story that HARP can affect your minds. Title, Russia, and this is legit because we have the document number, I've checked it out, document date and all that. Russian parliament concerned about U.S. plans to develop new weapon, again having to do with the high frequency active auroral research program HARP. Okay. End quote. There is some speculation that, again, CERN, HARP are doing some good things relative to suppressing certain interdimensional beings that could literally suck the energy out of this dimension. I know it sounds like something out of a movie, but again, we're going to find out very soon that, yes, they're suppressing these negative entities, arguably, these elites, but they're also doing it so that they can pursue their own negative entitorial agenda. So at that point, I mean, what's the difference, right? That's the thing. And I'm not saying to release these beings. I'm just saying that, again, I'm just grateful that we're even allowed to, go about our lives in a certain regard. With that being said, take a look at this right here. Patents.google.com. Propulsion system using the anti-gravity force of the vacuum in applications. Now, the status has been abandoned, but interestingly enough, take a look at some of these images as we flip through them. A propulsion system for aerial, terrestrial, underwater, or space propulsion achieved through the manipulation or engineering of the vacuum with the proper electromagnetic interactions. The vacuum manipulation will allow the use of a new form of propulsion and has applications in energy production and on the change of the time decay of radioactive elements. Opposing magnetic or electric fields create a mass repelling force. End quote. Again, magnets, very simple, anti-gravity, whatever you want to call it. This is not new science to the individuals in which are privy to this type of information. Notice Fibonacci sequence, Walter Russell, the universal one. You notice the similar symbolism here, folks, as it pertains to these certain shapes and geometric alignments that need to occur in order for this patent to be verified to justify this type of propulsion. Now, yes, it has been abandoned, but if we take a look at the inventor, Alexandre Tiago Baptista de Alves Martins, this is the only patent that he has per se. Interesting that these individuals make these patents on a public level and then they disappear, because the ones that have multiple patents, like Boyd Bushman, many others, it's still all right there. So what that tells me is that this individual was outside of the loop, but then was possibly brought in and silenced. Henceforth, why the patent has been abandoned, right? Why the propulsion system for all of this has been slowly, I guess, patented in such a way that, again, the rogue shadow government has figured out a long time ago. Now, let's get to acoustic levitation and land patents. This is interesting, folks. I've been looking forward to this. So, this is bibliotecaplates.net. Many of you by now know that I reference this site quite a bit just because it's a great indexing website. Indexing meaning they take sources from all over the place. So, this has to do with, this was according to Swedish designer Henry Kelsen, Tibetan style, okay? Tibetan monks levitate stones by using an acoustic levitation technique with the aid of drums in this 1939 sketch by Swedish aircraft designer Henry Kelsen. Now, a lot of people, before I go on, I just want to say a lot of people say, Stonehenge, they used acoustic levitation to do this. Interestingly enough, take a look at this right over here. When the stone, okay, was in the position, this is when it's going to get interesting, was in position, the monk behind the small drum gave a signal to start the concert. This is a diagram and the way in which acoustic levitation was activated by these Tibetans. The small drum had a very sharp sound and could be heard even with the other instruments making a terrible din. All the monks were singing and chanting a prayer, slowly increasing the tempo of this unbelievable noise. Now, before I go on, that is not to say that this prayer or chant is the precise method needed to activate this. We can argue that maybe, Muslims, Catholics, Christians, Jews praying could also activate this as well. Possibly. Why? Because again, you take an EMF reader and bring it to a church, bring it to a mosque, bring it anywhere. Anywhere where there's a large mass group of people praying or focusing on something, the EMF, just a basic EMF reader, the ticker goes off the charts. Literally, the ticker can't help itself. It looks like it's gonna burst. Anyways, continuously they brought new blocks to the meadow, transported 5 to 6 blocks per hour on a parabolic flight track approximately 500 meters long and 250 meters high. From time to time, a stone split, and the monks moved the split stones away. Quite an unbelievable task. Dr. Jarl knew about the hurling of the stones. Tibetan experts like Linavar, Spalding and Hewitt spoken about it, but they had never seen it. So Dr. Jarl was the first foreigner who had the opportunity to see this remarkable spectacle. Because he had the opinion in the beginning that he was the victim of mass psychosis, he made 2 films of the incident. The film shows exactly the same things that he had witnessed. Again, he wanted to make sure he wasn't crazy. Now, the fact that the films were immediately classified, okay, and the footage was confiscated, okay, is not very hard to understand once the given measurements are transponded into their geometric equivalents. It then becomes evident that the monks in Tibet are fully conversant with the laws governing the structure of matter, which the scientists in the modern-day Western world are now frantically exploring. It appears from the calculations that the prayers being chanted by the monks did not have any direct bearing on the fact that the stones were levitated from the ground, end quote, like I just said as well. With that being said, notice this as well. By the way, this is also consistent with the Tibetans making deals with the U.S. government and NATO to ensure that access to Hollow Earth and Agartha cannot be obtained within that particular vicinity so that they can sort of guard it, if you will, because apparently aliens and interdimensional beings visit the Tibetan monks all the time, constantly. But take a look. The reaction was not initiated by the religious fervor of the group, but by the superior scientific knowledge held by the high priests. The secret is in the geometric placement of the musical instruments in relation to the stones to be levitated, and the harmonic tuning of the drums and trumpets. The combined loud chanting of the priests using their voices at a certain pitch and rhythm most probably adds to the combined effect, but the subject matter of the chant, one believes, would be of no consequence. The sound waves being generated by the combination were directed in such a way that an anti-gravitational effect was created at the center of focus, position of the stones, and around the periphery or the arc of a third of a circle through which the stones moved. End quote. A very quick connection I'd like to make with that is Project Carrot. The center, according to the whistleblower who saw those documents that we covered many, many months ago, the force or load, if you will, as even Bob Lazar said, must be in the center in order for the craft to lift up and to levitate and activate. Now, it doesn't need to be a particular weight. But varying weights give different types of initial varying propulsion systems relative to gravity. Now, a lot of you might be saying, Dave, what does this have to do with land patents? Well, land patents from that angle is very simple. There's an energetic composition to the numerology of some of the patents allegedly that the government owns relative and irrespective of certain army bases, national parks, you name it. Now, we know that because if we take a look at this right here, the distance between the stone block and the central pivot of the drum support is shown as 63 meters. The large drums were said to be 1.5 meters long, so the distance from the block to the rear face of each drum could be close to 63.75 meters, considering that the pivot point would be near the center of balance. My theoretical analysis by calculator indicates that the exact distance would be 63.7079 meters for the optimum harmonic reaction. By mathematical conversion, we find that this value is equal to 206.2648062 geodetic feet, which is harmonically equal to the length of the Earth's radius in seconds of arc relative to the Earth's surface, which is 206.264.8062. Again, the decimal's just been moved over. Right? Now, again, think back to very basic fundamental math class, which we can argue in high school and elementary. We were taught flawed equations, which we will see very shortly, or miss equations with known answers, but they would leave them open on purpose. Now, look at this. This also leads us to the following associations. 206.2648062 multiplied by 2 is 412.5296124. The number squared is 170.180.68, which is the theoretical harmonic mass at the Earth's surface. Okay, this is interesting. The circumference of a complete circle with this radius would be 1346.822499 geodetic feet, which is a half harmonic of 2693.645 unified field theory. The distance from the stone block to a calculated point within the cliff face and the height of the ledge on the cliff face from ground level is given as 250 meters. Again, this is interesting. We take a look at some of the instruments used by the group, and they're very precisely measured as some of the instruments used by some of the Tibetan monks, right? Now, again, we're going to notice too, in my last book, I quote, I mentioned the flying machines. This is, again, the doctor who made the film that got confiscated and classified. I mentioned the flying machines described in ancient records that flew through the air with a melodious sound and theorized that the sonic apparatus was tuned to the harmonic unified equations. Okay, I believe that there is not much doubt that the Tibetans had possession of the secrets relating to the geometric structure of matter and the methods of manipulating the harmonic values. But if we can grasp the mathematical theory behind the incident and the extended application, then an even more fascinating idea presents itself. Now, the Tibetans have given us a direct indication of how to construct a sonically propelled anti-gravitational flying machine. And again, folks, this is just one form of propulsion. We have the vril, we have many different things, plasma. All that is necessary is to complete the circle of sonic generators indicated by the drums, trumpets, etc., and we have a disc which creates an anti-gravitational lifting force at the center. End quote. Now we see some diagrams to substantiate this, and again, we're going to notice that the math, in fact, does check out. With that being said, we see here acoustic levitation, right? This is according to universeinsideyou.com. All right. Now, again, we're going to notice as well, too, the science behind it. It is that when sound is used to counteract the force of gravity, and what I said going back to the very beginning of the episode, when people thought, many scientists in the public academia of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, thought many years ago that that gravity was a particle. It's not. It's a wave. Magnetism, music, it's all in waves. Just like how certain instances occur within that of tidal waves. Again, remote viewing to create this sort of fractal cone, if you will. Again, obtaining DNA to focus on frequential waves, mind controls, to focus on a particular target, or messing with their mind to create a form of psychosis. How do we know this? Well, take a look at this, academia.edu. This is theoretical, but again, it doesn't really get any stronger than this in terms of a fundamental argument based on principalistic evidence. Again, not proof, evidence. Acoustic levitation, or acoustophoresis, is a method for suspending matter in a medium by using acoustic radiation pressure from intense sound waves in the medium. Acoustic levitation takes advantage of the properties of sound to cause solids, liquids, and heavy gases to float. End quote. Interesting. Again, it has to be pertaining to solid, large objects. You would think the opposite, the lighter, the easier. Not necessarily true. Why? The only thing scientists understand on a public level, according to those that I've listened to and heard, from my understanding, please forgive me if I'm incorrect or if I'm obfuscating, but you only create more mass and gravity by just adding more weight to something. That's the most in which scientists on the public level understand gravity to be the case relative to our, layman's terms of understanding. If I have, for example, my phone here, and I just add more phones to it, it's going to weigh down more. Magnetism, right? That's mass, excuse me. With that being said, let's take a look at this right over here, going back to geoffrey.com. Some paraphrased quotes from from Mr. Ben Rich himself, Lockheed Martin, head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works division. Now, take a look at this right over here. We now have the technology to take ET home. We know there is no, it won't take someone's lifetime to do it. There is an error in the equations. We know what it is. We now have the capability to travel the stars. First, you have to understand that we will not get to the stars using chemical propulsion. Second, we have to devise a new propulsion technology. What we have to do is find out where Einstein went wrong, end quote. This was allegedly, again, within a secret meeting at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, done many, many years ago. Now, with that being said too, what we're going to find here as well is that if we scroll up a little bit, we're going to see here, and I quote, "In all my UFO workshops and in private talks, I was often asked, did we go to the moon? My answer has always been yes, but not how they said we did. I have stated that they went by the craft as mentioned above. Only difference, they got there in 3 minutes, 77 seconds. Now it can be done in moments," end quote. Basically, Neil Armstrong, and apparently according to some sources that have told me off the record, his family's life was threatened because of the things that he saw, which was, again, saying, we'll cover that in an upcoming public episode. However, they got there in 3 minutes. Now, again, does that mean that they were not in the lunar module? Does that mean they were not in Apollo 11? It's hard to say. It's hard to say how they did it. Maybe they left from another location. Again, because the tech was so advanced on a secretive level, why risk being in a propulsive rocket if you can actually know you'll get there safely and not in 3 months, in 3 minutes? You don't even have to leave. You don't even have to leave the time that it launches. You can literally leave, I don't know, maybe a couple hours before the moon landing's supposed to be broadcast live. And again, how was that done? Frequency, waves. Harnessing the Schumann resonance of the Earth to the naturally occurring heartbeat, if you will, of the Earth, in order to create mass consciousness to focus on the moon landing. And then what do? Create the problem, create the solution, if you will, right? Or vice versa. What is an opposing theory? The whole moon landing was staged. If some of it is and some of it isn't, and if they got there in different ways, using things like acoustic levitation, using things like psychotronic apparatuses of remote viewing and mental telepathy that don't require technology, it wouldn't surprise me that this would be the case. With that being said, folks, I know this is quite a lengthy episode, but I know I said I wouldn't be doing any content today, but, screw it. I figured, I have a little bit of energy in me, so I really wanted to get this out to you, and I hope you all enjoy. Let me know what you think. Cheers.